Gather round, children. Turn down the lights. Listen to a spooky story perfect for the Halloween season. And true, I know. I was there. It was in the mid-1980s. I was a sailor serving in a U.S. Naval Reserve Mobile Inshore Undersea Warfare Unit, a counterinsurgency and counterterrorism unit designed to sniff out and destroy any close-to-shore enemy swimmers, subs, attack craft, or underwater tanks. Yes, the Soviet Spetsnaz operate underwater tanks. But the threat we encountered during our 2 weeks of annual active duty that year did not come from the sea, nor was it Russian. It was otherworldly. Cue creaking door. We had spent the first week of our annual active duty working with Navy and Coast Guard surface units off the coast of San Francisco. It had been a fun week. Sneaking through San Francisco Bay at night, tracking Navy riverine boats, and engaging in running-gun battles with them in the wee hours, much to the dismay of civilian boaters and, maybe, 1 or 2 drug smugglers. We weren't sure. The second week, the operational element of our unit, those who provided the eyes and ears and killing power of the unit, were sent down to Fort Ord, then an active Army base. There we set up our electronics van full of radar, sonar, radio, and crypto gear on an isolated and lonely bluff overlooking the ocean. We were too far from our headquarters element for direct radio contact, but our Army liaison pointed out there was a phone connection in an abandoned building on the bluff not too far away from our base camp. Using a field radio, we established a comms relay system. The van would talk to a watchstander in the building via radio, and the watchstander would relay the message via telephone to our HQ and vice versa. The key words here are watchstander, as in one person, all alone in an ancient, empty building on a wind-swept ocean bluff in the middle of the night. Cue spooky music. The building was a 2-story wooden canteen. Not to be confused with something you drink water from, this canteen was the Army version of a nightclub. It dated from before World War II. I could tell because the ballroom walls were covered with the kind of artwork created by the New Deal Area WPA Arts program. That meant soldiers of 3 wars, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, had spent some of their last enjoyable days there before shipping off for combat. It made me wonder how many of those soldiers never returned. How many spirits of 3 generations of fighting men might have drifted back to the last place they remembered enjoying themselves. I'm a writer. Of course, I think like that. That night, I had the mid-watch from 12 a.m. to 4 a.m. Our watch positions were rotated every hour as they are on ships at sea. 1 hour would be spent on security lookout, huddled in not warm enough battle fatigues on the windswept bluff, staring into the black maw of the sea. Then an hour in the van manning the radio and coding or decoding. Another hour on the radar or sonar gear. And then an hour in the canteen building alone. As soon as I reported for duty, I heard the stories. Man, Hill, you're not going to like it over there, trust me. I tell you, it creeped the hell out of me. Haunted, that's what it is. Haunted. Sailors like to play pranks on each other, so I didn't pay much attention to the warnings. When it was time for me to stand watch in the canteen, I stamped along the sea bluff looking forward to getting it out of the cold. As I walked through the door, the off-going watchstander simply said, "Thank God you're here. I'm getting the hell out of here," or something like that. I'm not afraid of the dark or of empty buildings. In my military career, I've stood my share of security watches in darkened buildings. In college, I worked for a while as an armed security guard, making rounds alone through empty warehouses and factories. But the minute I was left alone in that canteen, I sensed something wasn't right. First, there was a sense I was being watched, a feeling that made me step outside and make sure none of my shipmates were preparing to pull a prank on me. Then there were the voices, murmurings of a crowd of people, always distant, barely discernible above the sound of the wind outside. The previous watchstanders had switched on all the downstairs lights, including what I called the ballroom. As soon as I walked into that room, the murmur stopped. Walking back to where the radio and telephone sat on a desk, the murmur started again. Then there were the footsteps. The entire building had wooden floors, and wooden floors make an unmistakable sound when trod upon. These were not the creaks and groans of an old structure settling, but distinct footsteps, particularly from upstairs. Accompanying the footsteps was the sound of wheeled furniture, like desk chairs rolling across a wooden floor. Joining these was the scrapping noise of something heavy being pushed across the floor. There was no doubt there was someone or something in that building besides me, and I was going to find out who or what. I'd already searched the downstairs. I was going to have to go upstairs next. The various sounds seemed to crescendo as I climbed the large staircase leading to the second story, as if the sound beckoned me into a siren's lair. I was wearing a Bowie-style knife in a sheath on my belt, and I pulled it out as if I were going to protect myself by stabbing to death a ghost that was already dead. Yes, I knew as I was doing it how stupid the gesture was, but the knife gave me some minute sense of security. As soon as I reached the second deck, as we sailors call floors, all the noise stopped. I found a light switch. When the lights came on, I was confronted by one of the great horrors of modern life, the sordid remains of what once had been a cube farm. The nearest side of the building was lined with cubicle workstations separated by portable, shoulder-height, cloth-covered walls, each with its own chair on rollers. I know how working in a cube farm can kill the human spirit. Why, then, would any ephemeral spirit choose to haunt one? Perhaps for eternity. The rest of the floor was taken up by large, wooden shipping crates. Though they were too heavy for me to move, I knew the scraping sound I heard downstairs came from those crates moving. I scampered down the stairs, and the noise on the second floor started up again. I huddled next to the radio and telephone and counted the minutes until my relief came. When it came time for my watch to end, something made me turn and look out the window. There, hovering just outside the window, was a hideous glowing face. No, not a ghost, spook, or spirit. It the sailor who was taking over the watch shining flashlight under his face. He was too ugly to be a ghost. For the rest of that week, everyone who stood watch in the old canteen continued to hear things. As with all sailors, we concealed our nervousness with bravado and black humor, but one particularly superstitious sailor refused to stand watch in there, switching watch positions with other sailors. I've always wondered if there was a story to the haunting of the old canteen, if, indeed, it was haunted. I've looked for reports of its haunting, but never found any. Well, sailors are a superstitious lot, and perhaps that's all we experienced, superstitions. But then again, why was that canteen, a structurally fine building, abandoned? Why was it sitting alone on the ocean bluff far from any other building, almost as if it were moved there to be isolated from the rest of the base? Why?